Welcome to the Affirming Village Podcast, where we center neurodivergent voices, affirm diverse ways of being, and empower families, educators, and advocates with knowledge that truly honors the whole learner. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff, a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mental health therapist and non-attorney special education advocate, and Lisa Baskin Wright, an ADHD and dyslexic educator and IEP coach. Together, we dig into conversations about neuroaffirming practices, special education, and disability rights. Please remember, nothing shared on this podcast is medical or legal advice, and the views shared here by the host and the guest are their personal opinions. This space is for educational purposes only, to help you feel informed, empowered, and never alone in the village. Welcome to the village, where we talk all things neurodiversity, advocacy, and community. I'm Dr. Destiny Huff.
I'm Lisa Baskin Wright. We are two moms, advocates, and unapologetic truth tellers who believe in building a village where our kids and we can thrive.
Between us, we've navigated IEP meetings, evaluations, suspensions, and a whole lot of system fun, quote unquote. And we don't just talk about this as professionals, we've lived it.
Exactly. I am a parent of two young adults, one of whom is ADHD, and Destiny is raising two neurodivergent kids who are still in public school. Our perspectives come from both sides of the table, parent and advocate.
On this podcast, we're going to keep it real about the messy, emotional, sometimes exhausting, but also deeply rewarding work of advocacy.
You can expect stories from our own journeys, practical tools for the IEP table, and honest conversations about the barriers our families face.
Because in this village, you're not alone.
Pull up a chair and let's get into it. All right, Destiny, do you want to get us started by sharing a little bit more about your journey, your story, your family, etc.?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it was my idea to start this podcast. And the only person that I could think about sitting on the other side of the table was Lisa. And so I was like, hey, let's do this. And the reason for that is because what she mentioned, in that we have two sides of the coin in experiences, and that her children are now adults and my children are still going through the public school system. But the reason why I got into the advocacy space in special education was because my oldest son entered into the public school system undiagnosed. And we had seen a lot of perfectionism, black or white thinking. And there would always be like these just little, I like to call them like little hurdles here and there as he was in childcare, because he's been in childcare since he was 6 weeks old.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's always been in a structured environment, quote unquote. So it was like, okay, we have these little hurdles. We were military, we were moving, so we thought it was new environment, new people. And then he got into the public school system, and it was just quite honestly a nightmare, and that we were not prepared for, but we definitely banded together. And so after, I always say, 3 suspensions back to back in 2 weeks at 5 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Like, I can laugh now, but it was truly like traumatic. Like, it was like, and to be clear, because I always feel like there's somebody out there being like, wow, to be suspended at 5, like there must have been something like significant, like he must have been hurting people, he must have. And no, actually no, it was just a situation of like, we really don't know what to do with him, and he's, what I would call really dysregulated, in that he was like hiding under the desk and like jumping on top of the desk, and so it was one of those situations. And so it was just like, it felt like suspension, not to create a plan, not to come up with a way to support him or the teacher, who, I just want to add in, his teacher was phenomenal. She was really communicating with us. We were really working as a team, and our hurdle was administration. So, that is how I got into the advocacy space, was just being like, we're military, we're going to move. There's something going on and I don't know what. And now I need to figure out how to support my child. So that's like really how I jumped in here.
No, I mean, those kinds of experiences are gonna, for some folks, it's so overwhelming that they freeze. And if they're working with an administration or there is a classroom teacher that's not willing to kind of meet them in the moment and get curious with them, for some people they shut down, right? It's a form of
Mhm.
gaslighting that can absolutely happen. So I don't know if anybody who's listening to this is sort of having this experience where they're having questions about their child and what's happening for them in school, and it's being seen through this disciplinary lens, and the child essentially is being criminalized and they're not quite sure what to do and they don't feel like they're being heard in the process. It's really challenging. And I think what was both hopeful and maybe perhaps a bit unique in your situation was, while it sounds like administration was taking more of that punitive disciplinary lens, you had a teacher that was open and wanting to collaborate and communicate with you, which is so important. You just need one. You need one on the team. It makes a
No,
huge difference. It
yeah,
makes
that
a
I
huge
mean,
difference.
100%. And that was the thing that, and I always, whenever I put our story out there, now I've been putting it out there, I think for like 3 or 4 years now.
Sure.
I always want to make it abundantly clear that his teacher was phenomenal. And in fact, in that dynamic with that district, so we were in the state of Louisiana. Um,
Right.
my son actually went through 3 teachers because they all left the district because of the lack of support and just I mean, she was one teacher to a classroom of 26 kids.
Right.
Before my child was even diagnosed, before he even had his special education evaluation, she already had several kids in her class, with IEPs as well. And one of the things I'll never forget that she told me, in case, anyone else out there is listening to this and thinking, oh yeah, that makes sense, is that, there my son told me that there was a child in his class that was having these really strong behaviors due to dysregulation. And my son told me, like, he's there every day. And I kind of stopped and thought, and I was like, I wonder if I get the call because I can come up and pick him up. I will come up and pick him up. And you don't know every parent's situation. And they're like, it's just too many variables in the same setting. And so I remember having a conversation with her and how she would just say, I'm doing the best I can. And I was like, I absolutely believe that. So I think that, it's important to acknowledge when those educators don't have support, when those parents are doing the best that they can, and then they both feel like they're up against a punitive system.
Yeah. And I actually think that's a better place to be
Mm-hmm.
than feeling like it's you as the family against the entirety of the school system, right? There's sort of this inherent adversarial relationship that gets set up. And it does take kind of this effort from both family and at least one person on the school side to bridge that gap and recognize that the system itself is deeply flawed, but that we are like unified in trying to navigate it together. And that makes all the difference in the world. It really does. It really does. Yeah, in terms of our story, so I have 2 children. I've got a 19-year-old diagnosed autistic ADHD and a 22-year-old who is undiagnosed, but we are self-diagnosing ADHD. Same with his mother. I am diagnosed dyslexic, but my son and I are two peas in the exact same pod. And so when my daughter was young, there were all kinds of questions about her development. Honestly, before she was even born, there were question marks throughout the pregnancy, and then as soon as she was born, there was lots of questions about her development. And so, at the time, she was receiving early intervention, and there was a lovely mom who also had her child getting support at this local center, and she created like a support group for parents. And it started as this larger group, and it kind of whittled down to there being 5 of us and then 4 of us. And we met once a month for years and years and years. I really kind of credit them with getting me through those tough early years. But all of them had children who were my son's age. And so they were navigating the school system before we were needing to engage it. And I just remember thinking, oh, I am not dealing with those people, because I naively, even though I am a public educator, I worked in general ed, and I come from, my family, basically everybody is in public education, and same with my husband's. My father-in-law was the director of special education in his district, but everybody else
Wow.
was general ed. And so I think I naively thought this would be a relatively simple system to navigate.
Mhm.
Boy, did I learn otherwise quickly. But there was a not very nice person, and I'm cleaning that all the way up
I
for
know
you,
it. I see.
Destiny, and
I
for
see
anybody
that.
that happens to be listening to this. I'm cleaning that all the way up. Um, who was sitting in the role of gatekeeper at the preschool. And so I was really naive in thinking if we sidestepped her,
Mhm.
then we would have kind of smoother sailing. And I learned the hard way that while, yes, she was and is still very much so a problem, she wasn't the entirety of the problem. And so it took us a year to get my daughter found eligible. There were lots of twists and turns in that
Wow.
story, none of them very good.
Mhm.
My husband actually wrote a book, and it chronicles all of this. It reads like it's fiction, but it's actually our story. It's called 13 Doors for anybody that happens to be interested in it. But it took almost a year to the day to get her found eligible. And when she did, it was under speech only. She did not have an autism diagnosis. The only thing that she'd been identified with at the time was sensory processing disorder, which in those years was not recognized at all. Nobody was talking about sensory. And if you brought it up, they thought you were speaking fables, right? Like nobody thought that that was a real thing. I know. And so we had a really tough go, and public education was really challenging for her, and lots of twists and turns, um, and ultimately legal representation and due process claims and multiple settlements and the whole 9 yards. And so, at the time we were living, and we're now back in this town, a relatively small community, and the parents of disabled children is relatively small. And so there was lots of, hey, do you know anybody that's navigating the IEP process or whatever? Oh yeah, my friend Lisa, give her a call. So for years and years and years, very informally, I was meeting parents and helping them kind of figure out how to ask their questions, or, you know, um, essentially navigate this process. And it wasn't until my husband published his book, and he's a nurse and I'm a teacher, neither one of us knew anything about book marketing. But as we were sort of fumbling our way through Instagram, and Destiny can attest to this, that anybody is listening, I have no tech skills whatsoever. Like, it's a miracle I actually am on the recording today.
She's
um,
telling the truth.
I am telling the truth. There are no lies detected here. I have no, it's like, oh gosh, I just have like a brain block. I can't do it. But together we were kind of fumbling our way through marketing his book, and then getting really curious about the folks that he was interacting with. And, one of those people did disability advocacy and supporting families at the IEP table. And that's how I started thinking about sort of formalizing my role as an advocate at the IEP table. At the time, I was supporting general education teachers, and it was a running joke at the university. I was both working for a small university in Oakland, California, and I was also working for Oakland Public Unified.
Okay.
And there was like a grant, and then between the two of them, a memorandum of understanding between the two. And so it was like dual hats. But it was a joke with the team at the university that not only was I leaving my lane, I had left the freeway. I was just, because I was so attuned to the learners in the room who were not being seen, who were being underserved, undersupported, disciplined instead of supported, misunderstood, etc. And so these newer general education teachers were brushing up against a system that they really didn't know how to navigate. When I got my credential, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, um, we got an afternoon on IEPs.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my credential at the university that I was working for, and 20 something years later, nothing had changed. And so these folks did not know how to engage in the IEP process.
Mm-hmm.
I would say well over 50% of the time, my gen ed teachers were not even invited to the meetings.
Which
A
is wild.
hundred, right? 100% of the time, they did not have a copy of the IEP. There were so many flaws in the system, and they were doing the best they could. They were so distraught when an IEP meeting would take place and they didn't know about it and they'd find out about it after the fact. It was bananas. And so it gave me an appreciation. In many ways, it was cathartic because our
Mm-hmm.
experience as parents at the IEP table had been lousy, to say the least.
Right.
It was really cathartic for me to see this other side, obviously in a different public school system, but a public school system just the same, to recognize the humanity of the folks on the other side of the table. Right?
And
Like,
I really want to like chime in on like a few things that you said, because one, you talked about support in a system, and I think that that is one of the things that everyone needs. You know, if you're listening and you're a parent or you're a general educator, special educator, related service provider, you know, I myself am a mental health therapist, and I have been in the early childhood, elementary, middle, and high school setting. And you need your people to really like, when you're like, this is wild, right? Like, this is actually happening. And it's like, yes. Or when you're just like, am I in the wrong in this? So I think one of the things is finding that support, which, welcome to the village. You found one. But the
exactly. You can't see me necessarily unless you're watching this on YouTube, but there's spirit fingers happening.
but the other side of that you mentioned that is interesting, and one of the reasons why I really wanted us to do this together, is that Lisa's situation, when she's talking about like her family situation and, you know, a year to the date and there being a hurdle in getting an IEP, for me it was my lack of knowledge and that being taken advantage of for my son getting an IEP. And so what
Sure.
I mean by that is, like, from the beginning we were like, hey, does he need a behavior intervention plan? Like, from the beginning we were like, do we need an IEP? We knew we couldn't, quote unquote, get a 504 because at that time he had no formal diagnoses. And so we were like, maybe we need to do the evaluation, but everything we did was verbal. We were verbally requesting everything.
Sure.
And, you know, I look back and I kick myself because as a mental health professional, we're like, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen.
Exactly.
But
It's so frustrating, but it's true. And it's very applicable to more than just special education, but it's absolutely applicable within special education, 100%.
and I was like, you know, but it's just, you know, we just did not. And then when we got to the height of it and the suspensions and everything, I remember like I called to frame it, you know, I am Black, my husband is Black, our children are Black, and we were in a predominantly white area. And so I actually reached out to a Black clinical psychologist and a Black educational psychologist, and I left a voicemail crying. And I usually, so to be clear, I don't like doing phones. I prefer sending emails. And I literally called and left a voicemail crying and was like, I think they're going to kick my son out of school. We don't know what's wrong. We need help. And like, thankfully, this clinical and educational psychologist in Louisiana, like, they had started their practice because of having neurodivergent Black disabled boys and
Sure.
seeing the lack of supports and how families were not aware. And so that's why they started it. And so they immediately were very like, let's help you. And that's how we actually got his autism diagnosis. And even then, when we did the special education evaluation, because my husband went to the superintendent and was basically like, they're trying to kick my kid out of school, like, they still were like, developmental delay as his category, and they literally were like, because he could speak.
Right.
And it was just like, what does that even mean? And so to fast forward, when we moved, because we were getting ready to move, and we were like, thank you, thankfully this was on the tail end of us being there, being military, so we spent 3 years there, but this was the last year that we were there before we moved. We were like, just like, like cut the check, write the IEP so we can get the hell out of here.
Right.
Because we were like, you all don't know what you're doing. And we actually, when we moved, we had him like his category changed because we had him reevaluated. They were like, yes, he needs pragmatics. Yes, he da 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 da. And we
Right.
went to an amazing school system. And so I really think it's interesting that I know in my experience, I have literally been on the side where you're just like, everyone goes through this. Does everyone go through this? This is horrible. And the
Right.
side where you're like, this is amazing and everyone should have this experience.
Right. Right. No, it's so literally crazy making. Like, I used to just go to meetings and all I could hear in my head was Twilight Zone music. Like, I used to lay awake at night and think to myself, I'd like to say I'm a creative person, but I'm not creative enough to come up with this story. And every day it's like a new thing. And it's maddening that, like, every day it's our podcast, so I'm just going to cuss on it. Every day there's a different fuck up. And it's like,
Already cussed. I was like, wait a minute,
did
this
you?
is
I
our
didn't even notice.
podcast. You didn't even notice. That's hilarious.
Things happen. Yeah, I mean, it was insanity. And, we did go into it with, a certain level of privilege. My husband and I are both white. We have family support. We have a direct family member, my father-in-law, who was a director of special education and a director of people services. Like, we knew the rules of engagement. My father is a retired attorney, not in special education, but enough to, like, give us some guidance and,
Yeah, I mean, attorney is attorney.
attorney's attorney. And before we had an attorney, the district brought an attorney to a meeting of ours, and my husband went and made friends, I'm using air quotes, with the superintendent, begging them not to bring an attorney. And they were like, oh, well, they're coming. So the meeting where she was finally found eligible, there were 17 people there. And we brought my dad, not as our attorney, but as just a witness. Like, I needed somebody with a legal brain sitting in the
Right.
room, just taking notes and, like, bearing witness to what I assumed was going to be an atrocity because the meeting before was, like, indescribable. But at the very end, they did find her eligible. But we used to say, and I think this is why Aaron ended up writing his book, was, we had friends who were single parents that the district was calling CPS on. We had friends who were Black that were not getting the same kind of support. And it's not that we were getting such great support, but we would have
Right.
at least one ally on the inside that would be like, hey, just so you know, y'all are on the high profile parent list. And I was like, well, am I in the top slot? Because if I'm going to be, like, targeted, I definitely need to be in the top seat. But, we had this level of education. I was an educator. We had all these people. When my daughter was kicked out, like, my mom also taught high school math, but she had written all kinds of curriculum and done all kinds of work and was really heavily entrenched in the math community. And immediately, like, we got people that sent us, manipulatives that we could use and curriculum that we could use because
Right.
we ended up having to take over her education for the second half, well, more than the second half of her second grade year. We were able to access a private neuropsychologist that was exceedingly thorough. We were able to access getting an attorney, and so when we showed up and the fuckery, got taken to a new level, we were sitting at a table armed with an attorney and a neuropsych. That is a very different experience. I don't know if you saw my post the other day, but I have a family new to me that I am supporting pro bono, who's a single Black mom. Like, there is no other parent in sight, and she has a 6-year-old Black boy, and what that school is doing is indescribable. It is literally indescribable. And I have spent hours with this wonderful woman who is just sobbing hysterically because they are trying to criminalize her. They're trying to hypersexualize her son. And she is just trying to do what's right by her child. And they are treating her like she is subhuman, and they are absolutely treating him like he is subhuman. And it's like, this shit would not fly if it was a wealthier, married, white parent. That doesn't mean there isn't fuckery going on, but it
Right,
looks
right,
different. You're not weaponizing systems in the same kind of way. The people I know who've had CPS like called on them, and I am a mandated reporter. You are a mandated reporter. It's
right.
not that we don't have to make that call sometimes, but
Mhm.
not in a way where we're intentionally trying to weaponize a system against an already marginalized human being. Of all the families I've worked with, I've only had one family that's white and married have CPS called against them. Everybody else has been a single mom, and most of them are single moms of color.
And I mean, I think what, and again, clearly Lisa is just proving why I wanted to co-host this with her because, like we call out the bullshit. We're definitely gonna have to put a warning on this about language, but no, like what you're talking about is just completely accurate. And I think, even when you talk about privilege, though, my husband and I, like, we did a video thing like a few weeks ago with Cheryl Poe, who's an advocate out of Virginia, and she's advocating for Kids Inc. Love her. And what we talked about was that even us in our position, we had a sense of privilege in that this was a school on a military base. It was not one of the military schools, so like under DODEA, which is the Department of Defense Education Act, but it was on a military base. My husband was a captain. He was a company commander. He was an officer, and his wife was a mental health therapist. A licensed mental health therapist and supervisor, right? So even the thing that he touched on when we talked about it was that, like, we even had this sense of privilege in that we were married, we both had multiple degrees between us, we both were professionals. My mother and my sister are educators, and so the first thing I did that really like raised the red flag for me, because I think what you speak to is very important, and I know, like, if other families are listening, one of the things that hit me really hard and my husband really hard was, first, we were just keeping it in house, right? We were just like, we were thinking that this was a behavior issue. Again, looking at old versus now. So this is like 2021. And we were thinking, though we were very confused because our child was not a behavior issue child, quote unquote, right? So again, our oldest and my youngest, they've both been in childcare since they were so many weeks old because I've always worked. And so he'd been in a structured setting. And we were like, oh, maybe we've been too gentle parenting, right? Too affirming. And we didn't even know that word yet. But we were very much doing things. I always say, I tell my mental health therapist clients this, each generation does it differently. And they learn from the prior generation. And whatever you felt like was a mismatch or whatever, when you were growing up, you try and change. And so, like, my parents were amazing, but also they were like, you're going to do what you're told when you're told. And that's that. Like, that's that generation. And we were
Yes, it
more like,
is.
yeah.
And I'm
we're more,
older than you, and yes, it is.
and then we were like, what do you think about that? How does that make you feel? Like, and so then we got to a point where we were like, maybe we've been doing it wrong. Like, maybe we should have been like our parents because we didn't have issues in school. And, but again, we did have that privilege. And so when I like called my husband crying, he was immediately like, his uncle was a assistant superintendent for a school when he was younger. And so he immediately said, his mind went to, okay, I know leadership and top and levels. And he was immediately like, who's at the top? The superintendent.
Right.
And once we cracked that door open, and at that point, even though I wasn't requesting things, I was documenting by sending emails. So I was sending an email saying, I would like a meeting, I'm concerned, I want to do this, and everything was downplayed. And so I had all of that, and that's what the superintendent ended up requesting for my husband. Like, he's like, send me all of your communication with the school. And one of the things we always look at is that we had the wherewithal, even though we felt it was late in the game, right? We had the ability to go, we need to reach out to someone. We need to do this. We need, when we got to that point, and we had the professional etiquette really to do that. And I was like, and that is not always the case. And
Right.
I used to think it was just like, just in that elitist mindset. You get in that mindset of like with the degrees and stuff. But as I began to crumble under the weight of this, and told my husband like I was having panic attacks, and I got to the point where I was like, you have to take calls from the school. On my days off, I had to tell them to call him if there was an issue because I literally could not breathe, and I still wasn't breathing and relaxing, but at least I didn't have to keep checking my phone every 5 minutes. It's not really about the education and the background. It's about the support, and it's about the capacity. And when you're constantly getting hit over and over and over again with emails and phone calls and class dojo messages and remind messages, like you get to a point where you're just like, I cannot take it. And so I think like that's the part of needing a village and needing that support and knowing you have people that understand, because once we went outside the house and once I reached out to my friend that is head of behavior in her district, and once I like started talking to my sister and my mom about really what's going on, not like the here or there, like, oh, we kind of had a rough day. um,
Right.
they started to tell me like they're taking advantage of you. Like my sister was like, why are you going to the school that much? Like how are they trying to help him? My friend was like, what plan are they creating when they're suspending him? Why are they not sending work home? Like, when he is suspended, like how is he get, and they just were like saying all these things. And what I realized is that the school was contacting me and I was becoming dysregulated, and I didn't have the ability to think clearly and respond. And then once I always took a step back, literally, Lisa, a day or two later, I was always like, wait a minute. My kid is a
Right.
great kid, and I do
Right.
not agree with your assessment of him.
Right. No, you're making me laugh because when my daughter was in second grade, things had gone very, very sideways. And the principal had called me in to discuss the sidewaysness of the situation. And at the time, she had said to me, the teacher is refusing to provide these accommodations that we were asking for. So one of the things that we were asking for was a public Montessori program. So for those that aren't familiar with Montessori, kids have kind of like an individualized work plan, and it like covers the week, and it just has like different activities and tasks and things on it, but the learner has a lot of autonomy in like the order they do it in and how they do, all the things. And so I think there were pieces of that that probably worked really well for her neurodivergent brain. But I also think she needed scaffolding and support with the getting started piece and some of the executive functioning piece, because the overwhelm of being in the learning environment was causing a ton of stress. And as her stress and overwhelm increased, her access to executive functioning skills diminished. So
Right.
I had asked if this teacher could literally spend 2 to 3 minutes with her at the beginning of each day once they'd done their, welcome the children, morning circle, whatever,
Right.
to just sit with her work plan for or two and just, hey, what job do you want to work on today? And do you know how to get started? And like essentially show some ethic of care for 90 seconds. I know, it was a huge ask. Um, and she refused. So the
That's
principal
wild.
called me into the office, no phone call, certainly nothing in writing.
Mm.
Called me in person, like I was called into the principal's office like I'm in trouble kind of thing.
You're in
Oh, this
trouble.
lady won't do this. Will, so you're going to have to. So of course I said yes, right? Because my kid was in crisis. They needed the help. I wasn't
Right.
working at the time. I
Right.
was tutoring at the time, but like I wasn't working like a 9 to 5. I wasn't doing this work at the time. Of course, of course, of course. So I go home and I'm so upset and like my brain's just all over the place. And I tell Aaron, and without missing a beat, totally deadpan, he was like, "Oh, I didn't know that you were an employee of Davis Joint Unified School District."
like it's so valid because like my husband wanted to step in earlier than I allowed, and like looking back, I think everything happens for a reason, unfortunately. And so he stepped in right when, and he literally was just like, no, it's done, I'm stepping in. But what you're talking about is actually what my sister said to me. Like, she
Right.
was like, because one of the things I always see, and I think we see this all the time, right? Where it's like, don't get your kid. Don't go get your kid. Don't go get your kid. They call you, don't come up there. And I tell my families a different variation of that.
Sure.
In that you have to do what is working for your child and you in that moment.
100%.
And the neuroaffirming side of that goes into that is that, one, if my child is calling,
Right.
if they are distressed, if they are dysregulated, I'm coming. If it's going to
Absolutely.
cause me more harm to leave them there, my mental capacity, I'm coming. And if you have relayed the situation to me and I feel like you are not a safe and trusted system for my child, I am
Right.
coming.
That is
But
correct.
what you're saying that Erin said, that's exactly what my sister said. She's like, let me tell you something. She was like, I have yet to hear from you why they should even be calling you. She
Right.
was like, and
Right.
I want to be clear, like, we in no way, like, I am team the students, the learners, and the staff should be safe. She
100%.
was like, nothing that you were telling me, and I know you're telling me the truth.
Sure. Of
She was
course.
like, points to them calling you. She was like,
Right.
they need to do their job and figure out how to support him.
That is
And
correct.
I think hearing that really, because I do again have family members and friends that are educators, made me really step back and go, okay, so I'm not wrong in feeling like they could be doing more, right? Because
Right.
we
Right.
were doing a lot. And just IEP tip, I always make sure that my parents put in their parent statements like what they're doing. If they're
That's a
comfortable
great
with
tip.
it. I'm taking my child to play therapy. My child is in private OT, private speech, because a lot of times there's just this view that we're doing everything right, which is usually compliance based from the school standpoint, and
Yep.
you're not doing enough. And so, but I just really wanted to like expound on what you were saying, Aaron said, because I was like, no, like that's literally, my sister was just like, how are you fully working? Me and my husband we were making it work, but she was like, when they are calling you all the time.
Yeah. No, it's incredibly difficult. And to kind of circle back to a point that you made earlier, is it was probably one of the first times after that conversation in the office with the principal. It was probably one of the first times that I like followed up an in-person or a phone call with written documentation. Like, thank you for taking the time to meet with me upon further reflection, right? It seems that there's agreement from the school side that this is a support that she requires and therefore the school needs to be providing it, right? Like,
Ding ding
but
ding ding ding.
right, ding, 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 ding. But, I think this is probably a great place for us to wrap up. You tapped into like the importance of finding your village, and we're just so pleased that you all are here and a part of this village, this community. It's so important for us that you feel seen, that we are lifting up the voices of so many and amplifying the voices of your learners. Just to give you a quick preview, we're going to be talking about IEPs through a neurodivergent lens. Destiny is autistic ADHD. I'm ADHD dyslexic. We're going to be talking about, we touched on it a bit today, but we're going to be
Mhm.
taking a much deeper dive into how bias shows up at the table and in the IEP process and what that can look like and how to navigate that. We're going to be talking about the parent experience, the guilt, the fatigue, and how to find joy and respite in this work because it's ongoing and lifelong. Um, and we're going to be talking about like, what does neuroaffirming even really mean, right? Like,
Mhm.
Destiny touched on this a little bit of like, she didn't know what that word meant at some point. And we were actually just recently on Colleen Ashford's Unfiltered IEPs, which was so much fun. Colleen, if you're listening, it was wonderful. And we kind of talked about this too, that it's become kind of a buzzword, but it's not just a performative thing. Like, it's action. And so we're going to be diving into this whole sort of movement and what it means to us, and how we're centering the learner in our work, and in our understanding of what neuroaffirming means. But Destiny, I am just so thrilled you invited me to do this with you. I would not want to do this with anyone else. I would definitely not do this alone. The tech alone would be a barrier to access. But we're just so excited you're here, and we're so excited to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, you're going to hear a lot more about us and our journey throughout this whole thing. It really ties into our advocacy and our work. And so hopefully you enjoyed our story and our why. And hopefully you guys will comment and let us know whether you follow us on Instagram at the Affirming Village Podcast, whether you're seeing us on YouTube, the Affirming Village Podcast, or TikTok, the Affirming Village Podcast, or Facebook, the Affirming Village Podcast. Yeah, so whether you're seeing us on any of those, definitely comment. Let us know your story. Let us know your why. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you again for joining us here in the Affirming Village. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff and Lisa Baskin Wright. And we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling seen, supported, and better equipped to advocate for yourself or your learner. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone else in the village. Until next time, keep advocating, keep affirming, and keep building the village we all deserve.